Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Detroit Regional Chamber Teletown Hall, celebrating diverse leaders in our community. I'm really excited today to be hosting Michael Rafferty, who's the Chief Executive Officer of New Detroit. But before I start with Michael, let me just a couple of housekeeping things. One, I want to remind you that you can submit questions. There is a box on the right-hand side. You'll see it. It's a long, narrow box where you can submit questions. My colleague, Bernard Parker, will be monitoring your questions. After I've spent some time with Michael, I'll turn it over to Bernard to ask some of your questions. I always like to say up front that sometimes it's hard to get to all those questions, so bear with us. And if we don't get to all of them, we apologize, but we find that sometimes there's so much good content here that we just can't get to them all. So we appreciate your understanding, but we really want your participation, and especially because we have such a great person here with us today. So again, I am welcoming Michael Rafferty, Chief Executive Officer of New Detroit. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're very happy to have you. Everything going well for you at New Detroit?
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I mean, I couldn't have chosen a more meaningful role at a time like this.
Right. Yeah, it's very
critical. A lot of progress.
Very critical time, and good to have a good leader like you in your seat.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's get started with some discussion. So you were kind enough to write a piece for us in our October Detroiter magazine, and you titled it, "We Went to the Moon, but Can We End Racism?" So in there, you pointed out that businesses said the right things in the wake of the George Floyd killing, but need to pair those words with actions. So I guess my question to you now, several months later, are you seeing the action and intentionality needed to address systemic inequities?
I'd say I'm seeing a spectrum, right? There are businesses and individuals who, quite frankly, unfortunately, still aren't saying anything. And, that's a group that, who just haven't found their value proposition yet, as far as I can say. There are those who've made statements and haven't taken action yet. And there are those who've made statements and are taking bold action. Those who I'm seeing act are giving me hope. But I think we still have a long way to go before we see the needle move systemically.
Okay, we'll come back to this in a couple minutes. But so let's share with our participants. New Detroit declared war on racism last June. How is New Detroit progressing on that effort, and what can the business community do to support it?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We declared war for a few reasons. I mean, when we did, we believed that we needed, to focus on the subject systemically, right? It was important for us to acknowledge that for far too long, we've been, and when I say we, I mean, we as Americans, we in the metro area, we've been focusing on the symptoms of racism. And by that, I mean things like income disparities, gaps in educational attainment, unequal treatment by law enforcement, I can keep going, rather than focusing on racism as a root cause. When we acknowledged, that, and in that same process, we acknowledged life, liberty, pursuit of happiness isn't, and hasn't been for all Americans. That was an important thing for us to say as we're talking about trying to achieve our mission of, racial understanding and racial equity. And we wanted to draw a clear, definitive line in the sand, say enough is enough and move toward addressing racism with the same intensity and urgency that one would a war. And as far as what the business community can do, we thought it was important for the declaration to lay out clear steps. Going back to the question about action, it's really easy to commit to doing something or doing something well, but there needs to be some direction. There was a Gallup study that was done that basically said that 55% of white Americans either don't believe that racism or bias exist, and If they do believe they exist, they don't believe there's a moral imperative to doing anything about it. This is back in like 2018, 19. But the other 45% understand that racism and racial bias exists, understand that there's a moral imperative to doing something, but don't know what to do. And I feel like, it was important for us when we declared something to make it, broad and out broad reaching to the public and have people, see something that they could take action from and commit with. And the declaration, like I said, it was far reaching. Lots of people did see it. Lots of people did hear about it. People have signed on to it. And I have heard a lot of people come back and say, I've started taking action. I would say how it's going and how it's progressing. Unfortunately, once we've committed to it, we're in it, and it's we're in it for the long haul. We're seeing some progress, but we haven't seen racism end yet. So
we've made progress, but we still have a ways to go.
We do. Well, a long way to go.
Okay. So help me with, what is the key to progress from self-examination? And we know many employers did that in 2020, to tangible efforts to take on implicit bias and racism.
Yeah. So, I think first off, the acknowledgement itself is important. It's important for everyone to, get past the question, and before I came into the role, it was amazing how many people were saying, aren't we past this? It's amazing how many people we, still talk to say, it's that was in the 60s. And, I have friends who are, BIPOC or Black. Making the acknowledgement that racism is still a problem is the first step. And making, in business, we talk about, relentless pursuit. We talk about, continuous improvement. If we have a bottom line, if we're bottom line motivated as business people, or as capitalists, we don't stop or get complacent with, a certain, amount of progress. We want to be aspirational. I think the self-examination is the first step. The acknowledgement, is part of that.
Right.
But committing yourself to not slowing down on it, committing yourself to, examining every flaw, and an opportunity for growth, is the next step. I think the other part to that, and the title of the article that we were talking about, we made it to the moon. I mean, think about this. For thousands of years, we were looking up at this glowing orb in the sky, saying, wouldn't it be great to go there, climbing tall trees, building towers to try to make it happen? And it wasn't until we invested in the technology to make it happen, until we got to the point where NASA had everyone from the CEO to the janitor saying, my job is to get to the moon, to get a man on the moon. We weren't able to do it. And so really making the investment in, the ecosystem of racial justice, and making sure that your organization and you individually are part of that ecosystem, those are the steps toward the action.
The Detroit Regional Chamber launched a racial justice and economic equity initiative last year. And, we said we really have to do an internal examination before we can have credibility externally. And it's been revealing. We've allowed our staff to be a part of that self-examination in many areas, to help us increase our diversity metrics. So I understand the self-examination importance, and hopefully, that's something after today, many more we'll start to talk about.
Yeah, and I commend you for doing that. And I got to say, and you'll see this as you continue to go. Self-examination isn't just a one and done. You have to continuously monitor your improvement, right? Continuously monitor, evaluate your progress. So kudos.
Yeah, well, that's key. We've, talked with a lot of resource experts, allowed our staff to, and, the one thing I really commend our staff that's working on this is they've committed to sustainable recommendations, not just one and done, but to make sure it's sustainable for the long term. So as the CEO of New Detroit, what does success in addressing social injustice and inequity look like at the end of 2021?
So we gained a lot of momentum in 2020. General awareness of racism has risen. I can't wait to see the Gallup study that I just mentioned. I would hope that 55% changes dramatically. I would also hope that, a category of people who are committed to ending racism or addressing racial bias also have practical steps to, and understand the practical steps are on the pathway to making change. I don't want to see the general awareness go down. I think a lot of people have been asking the question, when we get through the pandemic and when we start to, get back into our normal routines and lives, how much of that, that passion and concentration on systemic racism, are we going to see a downslope in trend? And I think that's possible. I think it's possible unless folks like us, when I say us, I mean you, me, folks who have committed themselves to this continue to beat the drum. I want to see the momentum go up. Let's put it that way. I'd say, even with the events of over the last year, seeing a disproportionate number of Black Americans die from COVID, seeing racial injustice play out, in video in real time. I'm amazed still that we have so many debates still, right? I'm amazed that there are debates about living wage, which is a pathway toward equity. I'm amazed that we're having debates about the use of the social vulnerability index, when we're talking about COVID distribution or vaccine distribution. I would like to see at the end of 2021, Americans, particularly, and decision makers specifically, focusing on racial equity as an imperative, seeing the moral and the business case, and having fewer debates about things that I think seem obvious to a lot of us who want to see equity.
So what are some of the ways that New Detroit can help or partner with businesses who want to increase equity?
Great question. Thank you. So one of the things that I came in saying is we need to shine a light on the problems and make sure the light stays on. And then from there, it's not just a matter of illuminating something. It's also offering guidance and offering intervention, right? So hey, here's the problem. Let's come up with a plan to fix the problem, and let's provide the resources and tools for you to do it, right? I mean, I feel like that's a role that New Detroit has played in its 50 plus year history, and needs to scale. Quite frankly, needs to continue to focus on and scale up. It was important for me to say that if we just touched a few hundred people or a few thousand people every year, my kids are going to inherit racism. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not in this job to have them inherit racism, right? It's aspirational, but someone's got to do it. And so I want to scale up a lot of these interventions and provide a lot more support to all of the institutions that hold up the system that we're talking about. And so, in the past, we provided services for training individuals and institutions on things like cultural competency. And I'm currently working with a few folks to build those out. And we're building out tools that are industry specific too, focusing on healthcare, focusing on hospitality and retail, focusing on law enforcement and criminal. So, my hope is, at this time next year, you're going to be seeing a lot more of New Detroit, particularly offering services to folks who are your members.
Oh, that's excellent. It'll be great to have a partnership with you to do that. So, for an organization that is seeking to become more equitable, which we know we have more work to do there, what do they need to do first?
You just hit the nail on the head with one of the things you're doing. I think there need to, when we're focused on a bottom line as a business, we're thinking about, our financial health, right? So we, do a lot of things, bring in consultants to figure out, how to optimize performance, bring in consultants and third parties to examine, not just financial health, but compliance and things like that. So you bring in auditors. It's the same sort of thing when we're talking about something as complicated, as equity, as diversity, and inclusion. And what I've seen a few organizations do really well is bring in support to audit the culture, of the organization. I think that's the first step. That's some of what you were talking about that you're doing at the chamber, the sort of the examination. What follows every examination like that is, okay, we found some opportunities, we found some weaknesses, we found some threats. Now we need an action plan. That's just step number 2. You need to invest then in the action that's in the plan. You need to continuously evaluate and monitor. Now, one of the things that I mentioned, that we're hoping to do at New Detroit is build out that capacity. That's an area that we're trying to focus on as well, because unfortunately, a lot of folks have to or have been going outside of Detroit and outside of the region, and as talking to somebody who's interested and committed to the economic success of the region. I'm sure you can appreciate this. We'd like to build and buy things at home. That's a good practice. And so, unfortunately, like I said, a lot of folks are going to North Carolina, Boston, California, New York, bringing in consultants to do this kind of work. We need to build that capacity out here in Detroit. And we're looking to do that in New Detroit.
Perfect. So this, I think, is a really key question. And how do you think the civil rights movement of the 1960s compares to 2020 social justice?
Oh, so that's a great question. Many, I've had this conversation with a colleague at Wayne State, Peter Hammer. Some of you may know him, and he says that it's interesting how cyclical time is. Right? How we tend to repeat things that have happened before. When you look at the mid 1800s, we're talking about abolition. We move to mid 1900s, we're talking about civil rights. And a lot of the question that I've had with my colleagues and academics and others is, how do we define this moment? Is it social justice? Is it Black Lives Matter? Is it anti-racism? And I would say that the natural evolution of this progress and this process that we're talking about, it is anti-racism. We should be right now focusing on, if we're talking about equity, that's one thing. But equity is different than inclusion. It's different than justice. It's different than civil rights. And the objective, I would say when we go out 100 years, what we should be saying is this moment actually created all of those things. It created racial justice, it created racial equity, it created diversity. We don't see gaps anymore. That should be the objective 100 years from now. And the best way that we can do that is to define this moment as anti-racist, right? I mean, we're
right.
Every organization, institution, individual, we should be looking at the entire system and ourselves, from soup to nuts, and
right.
and saying our aim here is to completely see absolutely no difference in outcome by race, and you can achieve that by anti-racism.
Right. Well, I still have a lot more questions, but I think I really need to turn it over to my colleague, Bernard Parker, and hear about some questions from those of us who are attending today. So Bernard, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you. So first of all, it's truly an engaging discussion. At one point, I felt like I was a participant just watching. I forgot that I was supposed to be working. So Michael, let me ask you this, just to kind of switch gears a little bit. You've done a tremendous, you've done a lot in economic development, right? For Economic Growth Corporation, we talked about a little bit of Wayne County, and now you find yourself at the forefront of social justice. What really prepared you? Because one would think, they really don't go hand in hand.
I'm going to start off answering a question that may not be what you asked, but I think it gets to it in context. I grew up in Detroit, born and raised, and it was, when you grow up in Detroit, when you have an opportunity to go to college, you have an opportunity, to experience upward mobility. I think you've got a duty and an obligation to serve, right? To much who's given, much is required. If you read the Bible, and if you happen to watch superhero stuff, Spider-Man, says the same sort of thing. But in economic development, to me, when I was focusing on that as my career, that's going to be the rising tide. If you increase economic opportunity, a lot of other things will follow. And in a lot of ways, that's true. But as I was getting deeper and deeper into the field of economic development, I saw that the inequities across categories, end up making it very difficult to, make places like Detroit better. When you have disparities in law enforcement and criminal justice, when you have disparities in healthcare and quality of life, around medicine, when you have, disparities in education, it's really difficult. And, economic development can't be a silver bullet for all those things. And then I just kind of did a little, historic analysis, and I thought, every person, who worked for Henry Ford got $5 a day,
Right.
for Equitable, redlining existed, and then you fast forward, 100 years, and, you don't see the equity that economic development opportunity created, for Black Detroiters and Black Americans. And so I thought it was important. Economic development won't work unless we have, cultural cohesion, and we invest in, advancing folks in a way toward equity. And so it was important for me to, think about this as an opportunity to, reinforce the work that I've been doing in economic development. Now, that's just the context. I'd say what prepared me for this, this work. I would say there's a heavy diagram overlap, between, working in communities like Detroit. I, spent some time in New York too. I worked in communities in Brooklyn that, were, predominant, communities of color, and Black communities. And, the overlap is really trying to advance people in place. And a lot of the ways that you think about economic development, they do overlap with the work of social and racial justice, or maybe outcomes do. So I could go in a lot deeper, but
No,
I hope that got to the question.
So Michael, here's something that I just learned. When you talk about economic development, social justice, and you brought up Henry Ford. Henry Ford actually, years ago, when he first started his company, went to a Black organization for a loan. So they had loaned him the money to do whatever he needed to do to get things started. And when he went back to this particular organization to repay the loan, they said, no, we don't want the money. Of course, Ford said, what do you mean you don't want the money? I borrowed the money from you. He said, I want you to give us jobs. And so when I started to think about things like economic development, you think about how the Ford created that middle class, the $5 an hour, and folk migrating from the South here up to the North for those types of jobs. That plays a lot in terms of what you had just spoke about, but I'm sure a lot of in terms of what you've seen over your career and now trying to mesh all that together for social justice. So that's excellent.
Yeah.
So I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tammy. So get ready for this. New Detroit was started out of the 1967 riots.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folk don't realize that it was J.L. Hudson, Mayor Kavanaugh, Governor Romney, who came together, 3 white folk that came together out of the riots and said, what do we need to do to stop this and create better change? And for some of your folk, Michael, that you mentioned Wayne State, you really should go back, and I'm speaking to the audience, go back and look at New Detroit's 1972 papers. Their archives, Michael, which really should be put in Charles Wright Museum if you haven't done it already. It's just phenomenal. And so some of the board members that I saw, Michael, were Paul Hubbard, Bernard Parker, Damon Keith, Sharon Nelton, Glenn Townsend, Karen Campbell, Clyde Cleveland, Walt Douglas, and that's just to name a few. So having known that you're really standing on the shoulders of giants, luminaries of the city of Detroit, how does it make you feel, brother? I mean, that's like, you mentioned a Marvel character, Spider-Man, which is one of my favorite. That's got to make you feel like the Hulk, right?
With great power comes great responsibility, right? Yes, standing on the shoulders
Yes.
of giants is, and that's probably the best way to say it. It's humbling, and it is truly an honor. Even with the board members we have today who are still with us.
Yes.
It's a lot of responsibility, but the role itself is one with a lot of responsibility. Like I said, I don't want my kids to inherit racism. It always goes back to that, and that sobers you. I definitely see this as something. It's important to make. It's important for me to make folks like JL Hudson proud. It's important for me to make folks like your dad proud. It's important for me to make folks like Judge Keith proud. Right? It's important, but I don't think any of us should get complacent or be proud unless we have something as much of a moonshot to say like, I don't want my kids to enter racism. Like there's a lot of work to do there. So there's holding up the history and holding up the legacy and making sure that the legacy is maintained and preserved, that folks like that can be proud of the work that we're doing. But I can't sit still unless and I can't look myself or my kids in the face unless I honestly believe that we have a shot at ending racism. So.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Tammy, but I can't leave you without saying how proud I am of my own employer, the Detroit Regional Chamber, the work that we're doing into racial justice, economic equity, and it's cutting edge work. It's always evolving, right? I mean, we think about the 1967 riots, and then, as you said, we moved forth to the Black Lives Movement, which was really a global movement because there were kids in Brazil and London, right? France. I saw folks in Germany. And not all these folks were Black folks. See, were white folks out here saying, we're tired of the racists. We're tired of the injustices. So I'm going to keep up the work that you're doing. You are God sent. And I'm going to turn this back over to Tammy. Thank you, sincerely.
Thank you. Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Just listening to you and Michael, I wish we were back to the time when we can sit together. I would love to have a roundtable discussion like this. I think we could just talk for so long. It would be so valuable. So hopefully, Michael, sometime in the future, we'll be able to do that again. But we've got just a few minutes left. So, this is your time. What did we not touch on that you think is really important to share today?
No, I mean, I think the questions that you asked were wonderful. It was a great cross section of questions, and I felt like I got a chance to say a lot there. I will say I appreciate. I have no idea how many people we're talking to right now, but I appreciate everybody for taking the time to listen, because quite frankly, it really starts there. We all spend our times in our bubbles, and unfortunately, that keeps us separated, and doesn't move us toward the goals that we're talking about here. I'd like to thank the chamber for not just bringing me into this conversation, but doing the work that you do. And I sit with Sandy from time to time, and he's definitely committed to promoting racial equity and justice. And that's what we need. We need leaders to step up, and we need to acknowledge that we're all leaders. We all have our role to play. We're part of the system. We have our role to play in either upholding, problems like racism and all of its effects. We've got a role in addressing it too. We talked about the declaration of war. If you're curious about it, please visit our website. It's www.newdetroit.org. And within it, you'll find the declaration of war. Really, it took us with something we're proud of. One should not be proud of declaring war, quite frankly, but we're proud of the content and what we're hoping to achieve. So please take a look.
Okay, well, thank you for those comments, and thank you for mentioning Sandy and his commitment. What we have really learned is if we're going to be successful, any organization, it starts at the top with leadership. There has to be a commitment from leadership. So for those of us who, you know, are on our journey right now, learning and growing, that's the best thing I can also say that we've learned from it is it does start at the top, and staff recognizes that. They know if it's there or it's not there.
That's right. That's right.
It's been a pleasure, Michael. You're doing such a great job at New Detroit. Thank you. Keep up that good work. And please know the Detroit Regional Chamber is here to be a partner anytime you need us in the future, too.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to that partnership, and I'm looking forward to seeing you face to face sometime soon.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to all of our attendees today. I hope you enjoyed this program, and it will be posted on our website, www.detroitchamber.com, if you'd like to check it out later. Thank you for participating, and goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.